How is everybody doing? I'm Nick Johnson, a member of the NFL expert team for Daily Fantasy Insider, and I am living the dream. I'm excited to be bringing y'all a new series introducing you to daily fantasy sports. We will be releasing a handful of videos that will have you better prepared to be a daily fantasy player if you are new to the industry or need some guidance. These videos will be a great place for you to start so that you can have more fun and make more money playing daily fantasy contests. If you're interested in daily fantasy, this will be a good launching pad for you. You can follow us on Twitter at DF Insider, and you can follow me at Roto Theory as well. Definitely check out dailyfantasyinsider.com where you can find our content for all the sports we cover, as well as our podcast covering the slate. In our first installation today, we will be talking about the basics of DFS and some lingo used in the DFS universe that will help you get accustomed to the game. So what is DFS? DFS stands for Daily Fantasy Sports, and it is the most exciting form of fantasy sports that you will find. If you've ever been in a season-long fantasy sports league with your friends or coworkers, then you've experienced the thrill of victory as well as the pain of losing. Daily Fantasy is not a season-long league, but it often scores like one. Most contests are one day only, but some can last multiple days. The thing that separates daily fantasy from season-long leagues is the ability to change your team from contest to contest. Your team is not locked from week to week or even day to day. On one night, I could play NBA contests with a particular lineup of players, and the very next night I will have the option to play again using entirely different players. DFS has made every single sport more interesting to me. I used to avoid watching the NBA until the finals, and now I am watching games every night and enjoying it. I had never watched a full NHL game until I started playing NHL DFS. Daily fantasy simply increases your enjoyment of sports. Now before we dig deep into DFS vernacular, let's address a few things. First off, sadly, DFS is not offered in every state, because it is illegal in some. If you are located in Alabama, Arizona, Delaware, Hawaii, Idaho, Iowa, Louisiana, Montana, Nevada, or Washington, you have no access to FanDuel or DraftKings. If you live in Texas, you do not have access to FanDuel. The good news is that it doesn't matter what your permanent residence is, it only matters where you are currently located when you play. So if your permanent residence is in Texas, but you spend your summers in Florida, you can play contests while you're in Florida. If you do live in a state where DFS is illegal, there are folks from your state who are pushing to legalize daily fantasy. I encourage you to find these folks and join the fight to legalize such a fun game. Secondly, DFS does not currently offer contests for every sport, but they do offer most of the main sports. Each platform has contests in specific sports, and we will talk about that in a future episode, but there are games offered for NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, MMA, soccer, WNBA, NASCAR, golf, and esports. So get out there and start entering contests for the sports you love. But before you do, let's go over some terminology that's frequently used in daily fantasy that might trip up a new user. So what are some important DFS terms to know? All DFS contests require that you select a lineup. These are the players and teams that you select for your fantasy team in that particular contest. You can see here, I just threw this together a few minutes ago, an NFL lineup for this weekend's slate. The majority of the contests that you play are going to be salary based. On FanDuel, you get a $60,000 mock salary to select your players, and you can select whomever you want as long as you don't go over the salary cap and you don't have more than 4 participants from one team. Each of the players here you can see has their own salary, which is predetermined based on matchup, ability, prior contests against the same team, etc. On DraftKings, you get a $50,000 mock salary with the same general requirements. Each platform has its own positional requirements, and we will get into that on an upcoming episode. When choosing a lineup, there are a lot of strategies that you can employ, but it's not a good idea to pick only your favorite players or randomly go through the player pool selecting guys that look like they're in good spots based on surface stats. With your lineup, you can choose to enter it into a cash game or a guaranteed prize pool. Don't be fooled by the title cash. Both game types offer cash prizes, but are structured in different ways. Cash games are contests in which half or almost half of the playing field earns a prize, but all winners earn the same prize whether they finish just above the pay line or if they finish first. Guaranteed prize pools, otherwise known as GPPs, pay out a much smaller portion of the playing field and the prizes are top heavy. This NFL lineup that I'm working with here is designed for the Sunday Million, which is a contest run on NFL Sundays that has thousands of entrants. This particular one has 252,100 entries, and the prizes are very top heavy. Let's see, the winner this week gets to take home 300 grand, second place gets 150,000, so on and so forth. And eventually you work your way down to where if you're outside of the top 100, you're only taking home 250. Now I'd be thrilled to take home 250, but that does definitely pale in comparison to the 300,000 that you get for taking first. These are GPPs or tournaments. A player who barely makes the pay line will probably still earn somewhere around double their entry fee, whereas if you're at the top, you could win hundreds or thousands more than what your entry fee is. The most popular GPP tournament is the Millionaire Maker, which is similar to the FanDuel Sunday Million. This is offered on DraftKings, and it covers the main slate of NFL Sundays. A slate is the array of games covered by a contest and can range from 2 games to 16 games. So let's go back to our lobby. I'm going to abandon my lineup there. This weekend for the NFL, there are a handful of different slates. The main slate is the most popular one, has the most amount of contests, the biggest contests, and it's more likely that you're going to be able to find a game that you want to enjoy. But there are other contests that they offer. They do have a full weekend slate that goes Thursday all the way through Monday. There's slates that are just part of the day on Sunday. There's a Sunday, Monday, and then one of our favorites at DFI, the prime time, which is the Sunday night football game and the Monday night football game. So the Sunday Million on FanDuel and the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings are examples of very large GPPs, but not all GPPs are alike. Some are 100 players, some are 1,000. It varies from slate to slate and sport to sport. In an upcoming episode, we'll talk about how you can approach contests joining in a way that will help you win more money. The design of your lineup will determine what type of contest you want to enter. In cash games, you want to select players that are safer and offer a high floor. This means that even in their worst game, they will still score enough points that they won't bury your line. This way, if you have a couple players who underperform, they don't sink you because they will barely underperform. The reason employing this strategy is such a good idea is because in cash games, you only need to outscore half the playing field. An example of a player with a high floor is Le'Veon Bell. He is capable of monster performances, and when we roster him, we definitely hope for these games. But we are also secure knowing that he very rarely lays an egg. This is because Bell gets so many carries and targets that even if he is inefficient with them, his volume alone will give him a high floor. In GPP lineups, you can still select players with high floors, but we also want to target players who have a high ceiling. So in my lineup that I constructed a little bit ago, I had Alex Smith at quarterback. Oh, it popped up for me already. Cool. I had Alex Smith at quarterback, Mark Ingram, Lamar Miller, Michael Thomas, Devin Funchess, Tyreek Hill, O.J. Howard, Patrick Murray, and the Jags defense. The Jags defense has had a crazy season, and they are certainly capable of scoring 20, 25 points as a defense. O.J. Howard had a game earlier this season where he had 2 touchdowns. These are players with examples of a high ceiling. Think of this ceiling as the greatest possible game that a player could have. Jason Witten has a pretty high floor, seeing as he catches a handful of passes every week, but his ceiling is rather limited. It's very unlikely that Witten will catch 10 passes for over 100 yards and multiple touchdowns. His ceiling is capped by his position, his age, and the talent around him. We want to roster these high ceiling players in GPP tournaments because only a select portion of entrants actually earn cash in a GPP. More often than not, you need to beat 75% or more of the other entrants in order to cash. Players are regularly described as being chalk or contrarian plays. Referring to a player as chalk implies that a large portion of entrants in a contest will have that player rostered. This can occur for a number of reasons. Maybe the player is in a great matchup, maybe they have been mispriced by the platform, or maybe they are being thrown into the rotation more because of an injury to a player in front of them on the depth chart. If you do your research before a slate, you can identify chalk players before the contest begins. An example of a potential chalk player in my lineup is Devin Funchess. Now, why would Devin Funchess be chalk this week? Well, news just broke today on the trade deadline that Kelvin Benjamin is going to be traded to Buffalo, which makes Devin Funchess essentially the only starting wide receiver for Carolina, and he'll definitely be the main target for Cam Newton with Greg Olsen on IR. We measure how chalk a player is by referencing his ownership. This is a percentage used to show how many entrants have rostered a player. If AJ Green were to be 50% owned, this means that half the entrants in a contest have him in their lineup. In cash games, this isn't much to worry about, but in GPP games, where you're trying to beat at least 80% of the field to even cash, you don't want to have too many players who are high owned. In GPPs, you want to select contrarian players. This means that the players are different from the chalk plays and are projected to be low owned. In Week 7 of 2017, LaShawn McCoy was a chalk play, and Ezekiel Elliott was rather popular as well. Sandwiched between these two star running backs on the salary scale was Todd Gurley. On our podcast covering the slate, I suggested that you roster Todd Gurley if you wanted to be contrarian, because a lot of owners would pay up for Elliott or pay down for McCoy. At the end of the day, the third place finisher in the Sunday Million had rostered Todd Gurley and reaped the benefits of Gurley being low owned, allowing him to separate from the field. When referencing ownership of players amongst your own lineups, this is typically referred to as exposure. If I were to play Tyler Seguin in a fourth of my hockey lineups, I would say that I have 25% exposure to him. Fantasy platforms earn their profit by taking what is called rake. This represents the percentage of entry fees that is kept by the company in order to make money. The lower the rake, the greater the chances you will win that contest and the more money you will win. This is another factor to consider when entering a contest. The more you win, the more your bankroll increases. When discussing a user's bankroll, you are typically referring to the amount of money that they have readily available in that particular platform's account. I tend to play more on FanDuel because that's where I cut my teeth at. I've been trying to play more on DraftKings, so a while back I deposited $10 into my account. I've recently been on a hot streak and have increased my bankroll to about $83. Being smart with your bankroll is a mandatory skill if you want to make money playing daily fantasy sports. The site Fantasy Draft is actually the best for bankroll building, as they take the lowest rake and give the most money back to the players. In a future installment, we will go over strategies to ensure you aren't constantly depositing. The biggest piece of managing bankroll is to make sure you don't get tilted. I was a victim of tilting recently. Kristaps Porzingis scored 16 points at a salary of $9,300. This meant that he scored 1.72 points per dollar. In NBA contests, the target value score for a player is 5 to 6 times their salary. If you want to have a good shot in GPPs, so at a $9,300 salary, I needed Porzingis to score at least 46.5 fantasy points to reach value. Ouch. He was a heavy anchor as my line sunk down and down in the rankings. I was so disappointed that I chose to double down in the after hours slate on FanDuel. I played way more of my bankroll than I should have in one night, and I put it at risk. Turns out, my after hours lineups cost me $14, and my main slate lineups made a clutch comeback thanks to DeMarcus Cousins going nuts and Thabo Sefolosha crushing value. I won $56 on my main slate lines. Had I stayed cool and avoided tilting, I would have had a really good night, but I let the slate get the best of me, and I made a bad decision. Tilting occurs when we allow the results to influence our process, deviating from what we know is the correct process. If you have a good process, the results will come. And that wraps up this edition of our introduction to daily fantasy sports. Coming soon, we will talk about bankroll management and how you can protect your investment to gain money long term. Head on over to dailyfantasyinsider.com to see our must-haves for tonight's slate and sign up for DFI University to get all of our best plays for each sport and each slate. Until next time, go get some wins.